Jones. I'm a senior product infrastructure architect for 1111 Systems. We're a cloud services provider out of Texas. Primarily the company's kind of known for being, we're Veeam's biggest partner, we're Zerto's biggest partner, we're VMware's second biggest partner, and Cohesity's second partner these days. But we do cloud services, but mostly around backup and DR. So that said, I work for a company in Texas, but I'm one of y'all. I'm from here as well, born and raised in Scott Depot, still live in Hurricane. My title was like super long and annoying, and product architect isn't one that lots of people see a lot. So effectively, I'm a Frankenstein lab nerd. So we have all these different products. I go in a lab and start mashing them together, and they come out as something that our salespeople can sell you, is what it boils down to. Just a little bit about me. I'm not going to run through all this stuff, but I'm Kool-Aid IT everywhere on social. So if you guys have questions, concerns, comments, want to yell at me, scream at me, whatever, hit me up wherever. I'm easy on that. I blog a little bit. If you like stickers, I have stickers. This is my little geek twist. Again, went to school around here. I really, really liked the talk before this. That one was amazing. And will second everything he said. You know, education matters, but don't sweat it if you don't know everything. But, you know, done all this, have done certifications, let some of them go, some of them don't. I'm also a bit of a social nerd. So there's all these influencer programs and stuff like that, which I abhor the name, but it's what they're called. But I'm in VMware's vExperts or Veeam Vanguards, AWS, Cisco, and it's a great way to learn things by teaching effectively. If you blog it, then you learn it in the process. But so with that, you know, we're here at a security conference, and here I am talking about backup. Well, the reality of it is security is an overlay that goes over enterprise, SMB, any version of IT that you can conceive of today. Okay, and it's a part of it. And a part of that security model, you've got to go all the way from dev all the way to how you're going to protect that data and be mindful of it all the way around. So as I mentioned, today we're going to talk about backup and DR or disaster recovery. There's hopefully going to be a little bit of something for everybody, going the gamut of here's how you back up, here's why you back up, to extreme security nerd knobs on making sure those backups are secure. But we can start with, why did we used to back up? Okay, so I'm a furry-toothed old geek. Well, the modern equivalent of it. I started in like 2000, and when I started thinking and like caring about anything that had to do with backups, back then it was fire, flood, and blood. Okay, the building blew up. You know, we had a derecho. We had the entire water system in the entire area go down, and nobody could come into work. You know, back then, you know, and back then I mean up to and including like 2015-ish. You know, everything was an on-prem backup on disk, you know, usually tape as your secondary. I can't tell you how many shoe boxes I've had in the closets of my home that as a sysadmin, my daily job was to take a tape and go put it in that shoe box. And then if you were really bougie and you had a budget, you might have a colo somewhere where you could do off-site replicas or off-site copies of your backups too. As we think about the security portion of it, you know, we think about data integrity, the data safety. Encryption was a little here and there. You might have had the primary copies were encrypted, but as they went to tape, you know, the portable version of it, not all the time. So that can be a little bit of a challenge. Well, so today the world has changed, okay? So as we think about why do we back up, why do we have DR policies, why do we create strategies around these kind of things? It's all ransomware. 100%, it's malware, it's, you know, you can abstract it out to a quote-unquote security event, but the driving force for everything that happens in the BCDR space today is ransomware. Veeam, you know, and I'll be the first to say I'm a big Veeam fanboy here, and that's the bread and butter of what I work with. It's not everything, but it's most of it. But they put out a ransomware trends report every year that's independently done. This year's iteration of it, of the 3,000 and some odd companies that they talked to, 85% of them reported that they had had a quote unquote security event in the previous 12 months. That's up from 76% last year, which now see I forgot a percent sign. Yay. Just the first half of this year, and there has been more attacks than there was in the entirety of last year. Okay? And when those attacks happen, 45% of the time, the production data is affected. What do I mean by production data is affected? That means it's been encrypted, it's been deleted, it's been modified in some way, shape, or form. In any one of those cases, effectively, a backup that you can trust is what you've got to work with. Okay? And let's say best case scenario, you've got good backups and, you know, and it's just basic run-of-the-mill type stuff. At a minimum, it's going to take you 3 weeks to after you triage and figure out what's broke to get those systems back up and running fully. Okay, and that's a best case scenario situation. I included a screenshot. I don't know if you guys have seen in the news here lately. There were some really interesting things that happened in Las Vegas here recently. Adam was talking about, and Eric as well, were talking about phishing and things like that. MGM is going to cost them a grand total of $100 million plus to recover from having all of their systems down and having the entire series of hotels offline for over a week. That came from one 10-minute phone call. They managed to pop Okta in a 10-minute social engineering attack and then escalate from there. Okay, so the user education part of it, that's what I'm saying, this is holistic. You got to think of it, all of it. What happens there affects backups. And we'll talk about that here in just a second. So ransomware itself is involving, I don't know, it's a security conference. I'm guessing you guys are up on this stuff. But it's worth saying, a lot of the stuff that we're seeing these days, it's state-sponsored, but it's not like state-sponsored, I want to take down the NSA. I mean, I read the Cuckoo's Egg, and I love that the Germans wanted to go through and go through American military places. Now it's state-sponsored to make money. You know, there was, I can't remember the number, but it's a insignificant amount of the North Korean GDP comes from ransomware attacks these days. You know, you have Russia as threat actors, you have China as threat actors, and those are just the ones that we're actively talking about. Okay? And it all starts, like we talked about, with phishing for credentials. Straight up, I put a screenshot up here from earlier this year that I got, where I got to play everybody's favorite game of, is it real or is it KnowBe4? Because, you know, KnowBe4 is very good at doing your testing, and lots of us have to do testing. And this was a legit email. They were trying to phish out our organization, and we managed to pass through it. And everything was cool there, but yeah, that was a lot of fun. And now we're seeing the actual, how am I going to get money from you as the company that's attacked? You're seeing that methodology evolve. Okay, so before it was just, you know, I'm going to get into your systems, I'm going to move laterally and own all the things that I can own, and then I'm just going to encrypt everything and put a screen up that says, send me Bitcoin. So now it's two-sided. The first thing that happens is they extract the data. They find a way, and backups are a nice, pretty package of a way to get that data out. There's other, that's not always the way, but it's a common one. Okay, so they get that data out, and then they encrypt your systems. And then the conversation becomes, well, if you want to get production back, you're going to pay the ransom. And if you don't want to pay that, if you think you can do it with backups, screw you. We have your data too, and we're going to put it out as a leak. Okay, a lot of these leak conversations you see hit the big NBC News, CNN, whatever here lately. That's all coming from that type of attack. And MGM in particular is the one that's kind of got me freaking out a little bit, because with MGM, they actually exfiltrated the data first, and then they didn't encrypt. They contacted the company and said, either pay us or we'll encrypt. Caesars and MGM both got hacked. Okay, you barely heard about Caesars because Caesar paid the ransom. MGM didn't, and then they were down, and now you're going to start to see dynamics around the cybersecurity insurance and what companies are going to see as, you know, going against the good practice of don't pay the ransom. They're evolving the techniques. So is what I'm getting to. So the last part of where this is changing is the backups and the data protection are absolutely a target, okay? From that same study, of the organizations that got popped, 75% of their backup repositories were affected. And again, they were encrypted. Largely part of the playbook, right before you hit the encrypt button, is delete all the backups. Or it was exfiltrated. You know, like I said, those backup files are a nice, clean way to get all that data out. And as long as you can reverse the encryption on the backups, or if there's no encryption on the backups, which happens far, far, far too much, you know, it's right there. You can just do whatever you want with it. And it's built into the playbooks of a lot of the bigger, quote unquote, organizations that are doing these kind of attacks today. I should have mentioned it. It was on the front slide. It'll be on the back slide, but I do maintain a GitHub repo for this session that has all of these links. So don't be sitting here freaking out like you got to write down lots of notes. All the slides are there and all the links are there. So, but yeah, so where does that leave us? Well, we need to start thinking more maturely than maybe you have in the past about how we back up, how we protect that data, and how we think about the restore. Okay, so let's think about backup a little bit. Who here has heard 3-2-1 before? Hey, the person that works for Veeam actually has heard from 3-2-1. Imagine that. Okay, so 3-2-1 means I've got 3 copies of the data at any point in time: production, a backup copy, and an offsite copy on 2 different types of medium. That could be I've got 1 copy on disk, 1 copy on tape, 1 copy in object, 1 copy in the cloud, and 1 copy offsite and encrypted. Okay. Some smart marketing people somewhere around the world has said that this isn't a long enough talk track, so now there's another one, which is you need an air-gapped copy. Air-gapped effectively means you have one that an attacker can't get to online in any way, shape, or form. Okay? And then finally, and this is a nice little Veeam twist that I don't like it, but frankly, I stole this slide from another talk that I've given, so it's still there. But it's very important that there's no errors in the backups. Okay? I used to be a backup exec admin for like 15 years. And how many of us have gone through and had backup jobs and it's like warning, 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 and you're like, it's fine, it's cool. And then even better yet, who here has backups and has tested them within the last, I don't know, 6 months? Yeah, that's frankly not enough hands. You know, I'm a big proponent of saying untested backups is just large, bulk, unverified data. Okay, until you try to restore that thing in some way, shape, or form, it's not a backup. Okay, because it can go all kinds of ways. So implementing this in anger is effectively what I call the Shrek approach, because Shrek is like an onion and onions have layers. Okay. So you know, you have your production data, you're going to wrap that in a nice pretty window of all of your production data of on-site backups. And then you're going to wrap all that with off-site immutable backups. Okay, immutable meaning that it can't be deleted. Okay, there's lots of different ways to get to immutability. We're going to talk about some of those here in a minute. Everything you talk about when we talk about backup and disaster recovery today, in the year of our Lord 2023, should be encrypted. Okay, you know, encrypt the backup files. When it flies through the air, through the wires to get from point A to point B, encrypt that. There's all kinds of ways to do it. Another thing that lots of people don't think about is that offsite copy. You know, there's all kinds of cool places to put things in the cloud these days. If it's a running system, if it's a virtual machine, if it's a physical server that you're backing up, think about having those offsite copies close to compute of some way, shape, or form. Okay? So for example, there's all kinds of service providers out there right now that'll give you some form of cloud storage. Can you go to OneDrive and then go and say, here is a place where I can spin up instances adjacent to that where the latency is low? When you get yourself into a recovery situation, which this is the bread and butter of what I do, what my company does, time is literally money. Okay, so the longer it takes for that restore to happen, the longer you're going to be down, the longer you're going to be without the systems that your customers need. Okay, so if you're, say for example, doing an offsite, let's say you're rolling your own and you've got, you know, you've got your production systems here in Charleston, or as I've done in the past, had a colo facility in the northern part of the state where I used the last generation of my servers, and that was what I had there to run, I couldn't run all the things that I needed to run from a production system today in the amount of compute that I had in that secondary location. So if I actually had to recover something in anger, I was going to find myself in a real bad time, because it was either go scramble and go buy servers off a rack, or buy a bunch of gaming desktops and turn them into virtualization servers, which was a thing that was actually considered and documented at one point, or it just literally took forever, or maybe you made choices of what could come up and what couldn't. Okay, so when you're going to do offsite backups, make sure you have the necessary amounts of compute there and available. And then finally, you want immutability everywhere you possibly can. That's really the gold standard these days. I've mentioned insider protection, which is kind of it's an older term for effectively doing an air gap backup or air gap, but really immutability is the game these days. It's so easy with every backup vendor that we talk to, that anybody will deal with today, to write that data out to an immutable Linux repository, or an object storage bucket, things along those lines. So really, as much as you can make it immutable, do so. So, that's the backup side. So best practices, let's go to the other side of it. Again, we talked a little bit about the recovery, okay? For any admins that are here, or anybody here that's advising admins, the number of times that I've seen somebody create a DR policy, they write it, they put it in a Word document, it goes in a file cabinet, and then it literally never gets touched. It's amazing how many times that happens, okay? A DR policy should be a living document. If you've got a SharePoint site, if you've got Confluence, if you've got something like that, make that bad boy front and center, and if it's not updated every 3 to 6 months, then you're doing something wrong, okay? Every time you bring up a new VM or a new application, include it. Make sure it's in your backup things. Talk to your shareholders within, or your stakeholders within your organization. How long can this actual application that your users use, or your developers make use of, how long can they be down without that being truly impactful? Okay? Because that will shape how you design your backup and how you shape your recovery. Okay? And I've already said this once, test, and then once you think you've got it right, test again, because it's not ever going to work right the same times over and over and over again. And then start to consider, the modern environment should be, it's not just backup. I'm going to stand here and I'm going to use the word backup probably 32,000 times here today. But really, it truly is DR and disaster recovery, okay? And consider a hybrid plan, okay? Think of it as, backup is your broad spectrum vaccine. Okay, you're going to apply it, and it's going to touch all the different things, and you're just going to have that as a baseline. You back up everything you've got, whether you think you're ever going to have to recover it or not. You can do shorter windows if you need to, but back up everything, and then use replication or higher tiered storage to do the things that are like, oh crap, if we're without this for less than a day, we're going to have a real bad time. Our customers are not going to be able to place orders. Our employees are not going to be able to complete loans, whatever that thing is. But think of it as a hybrid approach. You need both of those levers to create something meaningful. And then use a partner for something offsite. Y'all, I did colo facilities for a long time, and like going to where I use somebody else's storage not only is one of the easiest things that I can do, because then somebody else has to care about the scale out, but as an added feature, you now have an authentication break of where your production systems and your on-prem backups are, and then that off-site backup. Okay, you've got a whole other team. So let's say you get a rogue sysadmin. Okay, it's a whole lot harder to delete those remotes that are on somebody else's system than they are to delete the locals. Okay, and then public cloud plan, we'll talk about this a little bit more. Just know that just doing the arbitrary, I'm going to send all my backups to Wasabi, has some pitfalls, and a lot of them are around that compute conversation. So how does this work in like the hybrid approach? How does this work in anger? Okay, so in case it needs said, effectively you have all your backups, they're going to one location. You want those backups to go to a location that is adjacent to where you're doing the replication to. Okay, one of the reasons to do the replica is because when you replicate those core systems, you, by definition, have to build the frameworks of what you're going to have to recover everything else. Okay, you're going to have to, let's say you're going to use AWS as your DR facility. Okay, you're going to have to already build the VPC. You're going to have to already build the subnets. You're going to have to already build all the IAM mechanisms that you're going to need. Okay, all that stuff's going to be there. And you don't have to replicate everything, because that's when you start really driving up those price tags. But if you replicate the core things, the things that you need up really, really fast, think like Active Directory, SQL servers, all the other things that you have to have touch, then when you go to restore the backups from everything else into that facility, everything's already there and ready to rock and roll. It's pretty simple. All right, so into the security portion of this. Okay, so this is a community event. This is not Jim the Veeam Vanguard speaking. This is Jim just talking. So we're going to have some vendor neutral type things that I don't care who you're using for backup vendor. These are things that you need to consider and think about. First off, whatever thing that you're using for backup and disaster recovery, have that on a completely separate authentication mechanism than whatever your prod uses. Okay? If I launch a Veeam server today and just hit next to Windows, the domain admin and the account that you install has full rights over everything that's on that box. Okay? So if you do a separate environment, let's say you get somebody pop a laptop, okay? And then they move laterally into a system and can manage to elevate themselves up to domain admin. If you've just done the default way that a lot of people do with backup systems, whether it's they built it on a Windows server or they integrated into Active Directory, that domain admin account now is going to get full commands and full rights into that backup facility as well. So if you're a Windows shop, stand up a second set of Active Directory controllers and build an AD framework just for that. Okay? It costs you next to nothing if you're virtualizing. Okay? Or leave it standalone, however you need to do that. If you're using Okta or the artist formerly known as Azure AD, any of the different IDP systems, use a different one for backup. Okay? Or don't let that one you're using for all your end user applications talk to your backup systems. And then again, and I'm going to say this over and over again, immutability everywhere. Okay? You know, you can do object lock, which is the object storage version of that. That's far better than some of the other options that are out there, because it's actually layers of things that an attacker would have to pop the other side of that backup storage in order to get to a point where they can actually override the object lock. But any version of it is at least a deterrent. Okay? And if we're talking about immutability, at least do 90 days. The average ransomware attack today, it will sit dormant for 45 days before they start encrypting systems. So they'll get into the systems, sit there, do their deal, make sure they've scoped out everything that they want to do, and then they'll encrypt. Okay? So just keeping a week's worth of backups or only having immutability set to 7 days because you don't want to have to pay for long-term retention, then they can delete those backups too. Does that make sense? And then finally, long-term retention or GFS, grandfather, father, son restore points, the ones that are your absolute break glass compliance ones, let those be lifetime immutable. Okay? That's a good place to spend your money. Okay? And that actually happens automatically for a lot of systems today. But I am a Veeam person, so you know, there's 500,000-ish Veeam customers in the world. Is by and large the largest backup company in the world right now. So there's a lot of blast radius as far as this goes, and they span from the SMB up to the enterprise, which means there's lots of room for very dumb things to happen. I've said it once, don't ever do a default install. I mean, it's a Windows application. Veeam will only run, the actual core Veeam application will only run on Windows today. And like I said, if you just next your way through the installer, it's going to install a local copy of now Postgres, but before that it was MS SQL Express. But both of them are integrated into Active Directory or the local system or the local storage system, or excuse me, local authentication system. And it will also make whatever account and any domain admins that have access to that account, domain admins to the application. Okay, so these are places where get in the docs, know what you're doing, and be intentional with what you do in setting up these systems. One of the dirty little secrets around Veeam is how they interact with SQL. So I put a blog post in here, and again, this is in the materials. It is absolutely possible to not only reverse any encryption passwords that Veeam knows if you can get access to SQL, but also the credentials to any credentials that it knows to access your production systems. So there, again, back to backups are the target. The Contra group playbook actually has Veeam as a primary target that it looks for, because if it can get into it and it can get domain admin on that box, you can extract the token out of SQL for those credentials, and then it's a one-liner PowerShell command to reverse those credentials. So the best thing you can do is, one, put SQL in another box. Okay, it has to have SQL, and that's not for me to say that Veeam is this big, giant, insecure thing. Done well, it's, I still fervently believe, the best thing that's out there, but you've got to do it well. So put SQL in a different box. You can do Postgres, and that's great, but either way, use the SQL authentication engine for whatever platform you want to actually handle the authentication, and make sure that the Veeam application itself doesn't know any credentials to the system that hosts your SQL database. So, for example, if you install, let's say, Postgres on a Linux box over here, do not use the same password that you're on that box that you're using to back up Linux systems within your environment, to where you have to give it credentials to know how to get in and do in-app processing. And then, so now it supports GMSA, so the group managed systems accounts. So that is, or service accounts, yes. You can use that, and then Windows itself will revolve the passwords that it uses the SQL, so that actually helps a lot. And then you need to be careful and know what you need to monitor. There is a Veeam KB that tells you all the things to monitor on a Veeam system, to know to look for security, and that is growing by like the minute. Have have antivirus on the backup server. You'd be amazed how many people are like, well, it messed with our backups. Well, there's exclusions you have to do. Go do those things, but you really do want AV on that thing. The repositories, use an actual network ACL or any form of an ACL that you can conceive of, and make it to where that backup server is the only thing that can talk to that repository. Because by definition, the repository is mostly on another box and a physical device of some form or fashion. Make sure that that's the only thing that can talk to it, okay? And then 12.1 is getting ready to come out here recently, and this is going to be their quote-unquote security release. They're doing some neat things around in-flight ransomware detection. Effectively, you have backups go, and they just kind of stream and stream and stream, and they're just little increments. So I had 5 gigabytes of changes this week. All of a sudden, all of my backups are almost full backups, and nothing's changed. Well, what happened? Those systems got encrypted. And you can say, okay, that means that they probably got encrypted, and now they've been infected by ransomware. And they can start to do some things and start setting off notifications instead of it just happening in the dark. There's also integration into your logging systems like syslog or SIM. And then finally, you can start to leverage KMS, or a key management system, to handle those encryption keys. So when we talked about the encryption keys can be reversed. If you feed those as a token from a KMS system, that gets really powerful, and those can revolve, and it's just magic that happened behind the curtain. All right, so Veeam repositories. Everybody and their mom has a Windows-based Veeam repository. Don't do that. It's not cool. You know, you don't want to do it. You inherit all the things. Windows has come a long way, baby, to become more secure, but that's not to say that they are secure, okay, in this kind of way. First off, they don't support any form or fashion of immutability, so just say no, okay? Veeam's way of dealing with immutable operating system-based repositories is to do what they call a hardened Linux repository, okay? Great. Awesome idea. I love it. For the Linux heads that's in here, all it does is it uses the change attribute command to set an immutability flag. And if you can pop root on that Linux box, it's literally just chattr -i and the file name, and you turn off the immutability. That's all it takes. Okay, so be mindful. But the Tim DeWin, who's a person within Veeam's product group, I believe, or SE group, one or the other, wrote a really great little script that will help you with doing all the best practices to truly harden a repository. So if you are going to do this, do that. Linux repositories used to use, or still do if they've just been upgraded and upgraded and upgraded, they use SSH as the transport mechanism, which is fine until something happens with OpenSSH and you haven't patched it. And it's also fine until you do too many connections and you get too big, and then they start falling down, and nobody wants that either. Okay, so Veeam fixed that, and they put a what's called a transport executable, that it's what it uses to go back and forth, so it's no longer reliant on SSH. And all you have to do is right-click your repository and say upgrade, and it'll install it, and then you never have to talk SSH, so that you can actually turn off SSH to your repositories, which is a bit of a win. Okay? So, no, I mean it, you guys. So there's lots of conversations. You do need an on-prem copy of your backups. Okay? Like I said, we're a cloud service provider. I'm not in sales in any way, shape, or form, but I'm in product, which makes me somewhat sales adjacent. The sheer number of conversations that I get from customers that's like, so if we use your service, we don't have to have backups on site anymore, right? Like, no, you very much so, still very much so want backups on site, okay? Because you need that for the quick restores. You need those for grabbing a file. You need those for, you know, effectively having another copy, so it's not just on whatever service provider you choose. And again, we've talked about this over and over again. Cloud copies, make them immutable. Always make them encrypted. Fun fact, if you start sending a backup job to the cloud and you forget to check the box that's buried in like 4 different menus to turn on encryption, and then you later go, oh, well, crap, I forgot to do that, and then do it again, until you completely and totally restart the chain, every backup will continue to be unencrypted. Okay, so you have to be intentional with this. And then we've already talked about the compute. There is a link here. Veeam maintains a new list called Veeam Ready Object with Immutability. And this is various different providers that have gone to Veeam and said, certify us to be able to do your entire stack of all the things that you want to do. So, you know, object storage is the wild, wild west, as we are going to talk about. And your mileage may vary. Okay? So, object storage, if you're going to do on-prem, far, far better. And you can do it really cheap. So if you're going to go install Linux and do a Linux hardened repository, you can install Minio almost as simply as you can configure it as a Linux hardened repository and then address it as object storage. That gets you object lock capabilities. If you've got to do this thing at scale, Minio is pretty good. I'm talking like petabyte plus. We currently maintain almost 500 petabytes of customers' Veeam backup data globally. So we kind of know what we're doing these days with this. Minio is okay. Ceph is better, even though it's got its issues. If you're a smaller shop, which it wilds me out to say anything less than a petabyte is a smaller shop, but this is the world that we live in. Clouding is good, but just know above a petabyte, you're going to start having performance issues. And then if you're just a little SMB, you can go buy a $500 Synology, load it up with $500 more in hard disks, and install Minio as a container on it, and poof, you've got object. It works pretty slick. This is actually what my home runs on, and it's pretty easy. So if you are not all the way up on object storage, you've heard me say that over and over again. If you've not heard of that or dealt with that much, you probably have heard of AWS S3, which is the preeminent object storage platform that's out there. Understand that S3 and S3 compatible is an API, it's not a protocol. So those of us that work in backup and data storage and things like that tend to think of it as like, well, it's S3, it's just going to work. Okay, it's an API, and every company that implements it can and will implement it differently. Okay, so things like Swift Stack doesn't support immutability. Okay, or very few of them support things like the secure token service. Okay, these are all aspects of the AWS S3 service. And when you see S3 compatible, it's very tempting to say, oh, it's the same thing. No, it's not. Okay, so know that they're not all the same. They're not all alike. But there's ways to know that it's going to do the things that you need it to do. Okay, if we're saying that immutability is that checkbox that you need, there are a couple different validation tests out there. I vastly prefer the Ceph one, because at least Ceph says that they are not as compliant as AWS itself is. Minio has rigged their test to where Minio is a more compliant S3 compliant service than AWS is, which is a neat little trick. It works out. But you can go and install these, set up a quick account. It'll cost you like 50 cents to truly test this for yourself in your own organization. And you can kind of go from there. And we started to talk about this. So, hyperscaler backups, sending things off site. Again, customers call, they want to just send it to Wasabi. Okay, they want to send it to Backblaze's B2 service. Everybody wants this right now. Oh, shoot, hold on a second. Okay, this is a very bad idea. Maintain a local copy, use that object storage service, that AWS S3, that Wasabi, whatever. Use that as your secondary copy, okay? You got to think through your restore workflow. We've hit this before. There's no compute there. Or if there is compute, you're going to have to manually figure out how to make that compute work for you, okay? And then you're going to have the support and staffing issues, okay? If I'm going to send it out there, I have been through, full disclosure, I have been through a large-scale ransomware attack as an admin, and then I've since then talked to lots of them that have been in the middle of it. Trust me when I tell you, when that first system becomes encrypted and you've seen it, in your mind, it becomes a race against the clock, okay? You've got to get things back as fast as physically possible in a secure way, and you're having somebody on the other side that knows what the hell they're talking about is the best friend that you're ever going to have. Especially if you can talk to them through the process and iterate, do testing with them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If we talk about, I'm going to use AWS or Wasabi or Backblaze as that secondary copy or the primary copy, all those kind of things, know that there are going to be costs that aren't what's on the website. Okay? Anytime we talk about cloud-based storage systems, there's usually API request costs. There's egress costs. There might be minimum retention. Wasabi's kind of famously known for, well, we're the no extra cost service, but that data has to sit there for 90 days. If you delete it early, you're still going to pay for it. Okay? Know what service you're using. Know what their expected costs are so that you aren't in a situation where you don't know what you're going to run into. And then we talked about this already. I'm getting duplicative, but not all immutable backup services are the same. I've got a little QNAP device in my house too, and QNAP has its own little QU object storage service. You can't put a certificate on it, so there's no secure storage. There's no immutability. There's all kinds of different ways. So just know what you're buying. Go. There we go. All right, so everything that I've been talking about so far is your more traditional on-prem enterprise SMB where you do backups on site, okay? As we put things into, as we start to, or not start, we've been in it, as we continue our journey into hybrid IT, and a lot of our workloads are now leaving our own data centers and either going and running as an instance in AWS or Azure, or they're going to a SaaS provider like Microsoft 365. There is a common misconception that, oh, it's in the cloud, it's fine. We don't need to worry about that. If you haven't ever heard the term or you've never seen it before, go Google the term shared responsibility model. Every single cloud service provider out there has this. It will be very front and center on their front page. And effectively it says, we're responsible for the infrastructure. We are not responsible for your data, and we're not responsible for your backups. Okay? So that data, even though it's in somebody else's, running somewhere else, is still your problem. Okay? Microsoft 365 is super shiny right now. We do more Microsoft 365 backups than any single service provider in the world right now. And it's a day in, day out conversation where customers are getting popped because all the authentication systems are integrated. And then somebody goes into M365 and just starts deleting users. Okay? That's, yes, you'll have 30 days that you can get data back for your current users. But if you're an organization that has to care about compliance, you're not going to get anything that's more than 31 days old. So if you deleted a user 32 days ago, that data is never coming back. Okay? So you have to think about that. Okay? And as you're thinking about that, think about the other applications that truly make you and your organization or your customers' organizations work. Things like Salesforce. Things like I said, I can't bring myself to say Intra ID, which is what Azure AD is called now. So whatever. Or like Google Workspaces, okay? What happens if you can't get into SharePoint tomorrow and work on your documents? Okay, these are bad things. And in those situations, the same rules should all apply. You want immutability everywhere, you want crypto everywhere. And then finally, when it comes to like SaaS backups, which there's a bazillion different options for them right now, where that service runs, in my personal opinion, matters. You look at any of the biggies that are out there right now. Datto, Commvault Metallic, Veeam just launched their Cirrus product or acquired their Cirrus product. Every single one of those backs up Microsoft 365. Every single one of those runs in Microsoft Azure. Azure's had a really bad year in terms of security, just in general. And then you've got the same authentication mechanisms under both where your backups are and where that is. Okay? Think of what happens upstream. And just remember, you know, this is my favorite sticker ever in the history of mankind. Okay? So you want to abstract your mind and say, it's going to be fine, it's running in the cloud. It's just somebody else's computer. There's a sysadmin on the other side of that that's doing the same things that you're doing. Just know that they're doing it at scale and hopefully doing it with a lot more automation. Okay? So there you go. And with that, I pretty much wrap my content. Is there any questions? Okay. Well, with that, thank you very much for attending my TED Talk, and have a great day.